No one could have imagined that in a room full of diamonds and designer dresses, a 7-year-old boy would make a choice that would change 3 lives forever. This is a story of how a child's innocent wisdom revealed truths that adults were too blind to see. Meet little Thomas Chun, just 7 years old, with his father's sharp features softened by childhood innocence and eyes that still believed in fairy tales. His favorite dinosaur backpack was always slightly unzipped, paper spilling out because he was too excited about life to worry about organization. His father, Richard Chun, 45, a tech mogul whose empire spanned continents, had everything except time for his son. Since Thomas's mother Elizabeth had passed away 3 years ago in a car accident, Richard had buried himself in work, convinced that building a bigger empire would somehow fill the void she left behind. And then there was Sienna O'Brien, 28, whose fiery red hair caught the sunlight like spun copper, and whose emerald green eyes held a warmth that could melt the coldest heart. She had arrived from Dublin 2 years ago with a teaching degree that wasn't recognized in America and dreams bigger than her bank account. She had been a Chun family's housekeeper for 2 years, but to Thomas, she was so much more. She was the one who knew that he liked his sandwiches cut in triangles, who remembered that he was afraid of thunderstorms, who actually listened when he talked about his day at school. She was the one who turned his tears into laughter and his fears into adventures. The story unfolds in the Chun penthouse in Manhattan, 60 floors above the chaos of the city, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the entire world, yet couldn't show Richard what was happening in his own home. It was a place of pristine white furniture that no child dared touch, priceless art that meant nothing to a lonely boy, and 17 empty bedrooms that echoed with memories of a mother's laughter. The penthouse had everything money could buy and nothing that a heart could hold. Everything changed on a Friday afternoon in October, when Richard came home early, a rarity that his assistant had marked on the calendar as nothing short of miraculous. He was expecting to find Thomas with the latest in a string of nannies, probably glued to an iPad while she scrolled through her phone. Instead, he heard something he hadn't heard in months, his son's genuine, belly-deep laughter floating from the kitchen. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, watching a scene that would replay in his mind for years to come. Thomas was standing on a step stool, flour in his dark hair like snow, chocolate on his nose, and joy radiating from every inch of his small body. Beside him, Sienna was teaching him to roll cookie dough, her Irish accent making the instructions sound like poetry. "Now, Thomas, my boy, the secret to perfect cookies isn't in the recipe," she was saying, her green eyes twinkling. "It's in the love you put into them. Each one should make someone smile. Like how you make me smile every day," Thomas asked, looking up at her with such pure adoration that Richard felt his chest tighten. "Ah, you charmer," Sienna laughed, tapping his nose with a flour-covered finger. "You'll be breaking hearts before you know it." They were making dinosaur-shaped cookies, Thomas's latest obsession, and Sienna knew not just that he loved dinosaurs, but that his favorite was a Pachycephalosaurus because it has the funniest name. She knew that he liked the T-Rex cookies to have extra chocolate chips for teeth, and that the Brachiosaurus needed to be holding a tiny cookie leaf. This wasn't just baking, this was love in action. For a moment, Richard saw his wife Elizabeth in that kitchen, remembered how she used to bake with Thomas when he was barely 4, how she believed that kitchens were for messes and memories, not just meals. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His son had found that again, not with any of the expensive nannies or elite tutors, but with their housekeeper. That's when the idea struck him. Thomas needed a mother, not just a caregiver, but a real mother who would love him, guide him, and fill the Elizabeth-shaped hole in their lives. And Richard, in his CEO wisdom, decided to approach this like any other acquisition. He would interview candidates, assess their qualifications, and make the best strategic choice for his son's future. If you believe that children see truths that adults miss, maybe it's time to join us on this journey. Because what happened during those dinners would teach a powerful man the most important lesson of his life. The very next week, Richard orchestrated what he considered a brilliant solution. His assistant spent days curating a list of the most eligible women in New York. Investment bankers with Ivy League degrees who could help Thomas with advanced mathematics by age 10. Models with Instagram followings in the millions who could ensure he'd never lack for social connections. heiresses who summered in the Hamptons and could open doors that even Richard's money couldn't. He scheduled a series of elaborate dinners, telling Thomas to watch carefully, to help him choose the perfect mother from among these accomplished women. The first dinner was with Anastasia Volkov, a principal dancer with the New York Ballet. She arrived in a flowing designer gown, her posture so perfect it made the furniture look slouched. She brought Thomas an autograph photo of herself and spent the evening talking about her upcoming performance in Swan Lake. When Thomas tried to show her his dinosaur collection, she wrinkled her nose and said, "Perhaps we could interest you in more refined hobbies." Ballet appreciates discipline. Thomas had politely excused himself to use the bathroom and hadn't returned for 20 minutes. Richard found him in the kitchen with Sienna, helping her dry dishes and telling her about a new dinosaur fact he'd learned at school. The second dinner featured Dr. Margaret Sterling, a neurosurgeon who arrived with a model of the human brain for Thomas. She spent the meal explaining neural pathways and the importance of academic excellence. "By your age," she informed Thomas, "I was already reading at a college level. We'll need to accelerate your educational timeline if you're going to reach your full potential." Thomas had asked if she knew any jokes. When she said humor was a distraction from achievement, he had quietly pushed his vegetables around his plate until Sienna came to clear the table and whispered something that made him giggle. Each evening brought a new candidate, each more impressive on paper than the last. Vivian Blackwood, a fashion designer, brought Thomas a miniature tuxedo and spoke about the importance of image. "You can never make a first impression twice," she said, adjusting his collar with manicured nails that felt like tiny knives. Patricia Pemberton, a senator's daughter, promised him his own horse and riding lessons at her family's estate. "All proper young men should know equestrian sports," she declared. Cynthia Chin Williams, no relation despite the name, a pharmaceutical heiress, offered to redecorate his entire room with whatever theme he wanted. Though perhaps something more sophisticated than dinosaurs? "You're not a baby anymore." But after each dinner, when Richard would ask his son's opinion, Thomas would give the same response. "She's nice, Dad, but she doesn't feel like a mom." What does a mom feel like? Richard asked one night, genuinely puzzled. Thomas thought for a long moment, his face scrunched in concentration. "Like when Sienna hugs me and I can breathe better. Like when she knows I'm sad before I even say anything. Like how she makes regular food taste special just because she made it for me." We have more stories like this coming. So don't forget to hit the like button and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the smallest voices. Richard dismissed his son's observations as childhood attachment to a caregiver. After all, what did a 7-year-old know about choosing a mother? He needed someone who could guide Thomas through society, who could ensure his success, who could be a strategic partner in raising the heir to the Qin Empire. Sienna was sweet, yes, but she was just the help. The turning point came during the 7th dinner. Richard had invited Victoria Pemberton, Patricia's cousin and a federal judge's daughter who seemed perfect on paper. Harvard Law, family connections to 3 Supreme Court justices, and a trust fund that rivaled some small country's GDP. She arrived in a white Chanel suit, her blonde hair so perfectly styled it looked like a helmet. Carrying a briefcase full of Thomas's new schedule, she prepared. "I've taken the liberty of planning out Thomas's next 10 years, she announced over the appetizer course. "Private tutoring will begin at 6 a.m., followed by Mandarin lessons, then school, then violin practice. Music is mathematical, excellent for developing the mind, then chess club, debate team preparation, and lights out by 8:30 p.m. Weekends will be for test prep and networking events with other prominent families' children." Thomas's face had grown paler with each addition to the schedule. "When do I play?" he asked quietly. "Play." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Successful people don't play, Thomas. They prepare." That's when it happened. Thomas, reaching for his water glass with trembling hands, whether from anger or sadness, Richard couldn't tell, knocked over his grape juice. The purple liquid spread across the pristine white tablecloth like a purple tsunami, splashing onto Victoria's designer suit. Time seemed to stop as the juice dripped from the table onto her white designer shoes. She shrieked, jumping back so fast her chair toppled over. "You clumsy little brat," she exclaimed. her perfect composure cracking like a mask. "This is a $10,000 suit. Were you raised in a barn?" "Oh, wait," she laughed coldly. "You were raised by the help? So I suppose that explains it." Thomas's eyes filled with tears, his small shoulders shaking. Richard sat frozen, shocked by the venom in Victoria's voice. But before he could react, Sienna appeared from the kitchen. Without hesitation, she knelt beside Thomas, her green eyes meeting his at eye level. She didn't look at Victoria, didn't acknowledge the mess, focused entirely on the breaking heart in front of her. "Accidents happen, sweetheart," she said softly, her Irish accent making the word sound like a lullaby. "Remember what we always say? Messes can be cleaned, but hurt feelings are harder to fix." She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, one with little dinosaurs on it that she bought specially for Thomas, and gently wiped his tears. "Now, should we clean this up together? I think Mr. Rex here want to help," she said, making the dinosaur on the handkerchief walk across the table, earning a watery giggle from Thomas. "This is exactly the problem," Victoria seethed, pointing at Sienna with a manicured finger. "You've let the help coddle him. He needs discipline, not dinosaur handkerchiefs. Richard, I insist you fire this woman immediately. She's clearly overstepped her boundaries, and she loves me." Thomas suddenly shouted, standing up on his chair, his small fists clenched. "She loves me when I spill things, and when I get bad grades, and when I have nightmares, and when I'm not perfect. That's what moms do. They love you anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Richard felt something shift in his chest, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. Sienna had gone very still, her hand still protectively on Thomas's shoulder, tears making her green eyes shine like emeralds in the rain. "I think you should leave," Richard said quietly to Victoria. "Excuse me." She turned her icy glare on him. "You're dismissing me? For her? She's the maid, Richard. The maid." "No," Richard said, standing slowly, moving to stand beside his son and Sienna. "She's a woman who's been raising my son while I've been too blind to see it. Please leave. Would you have listened to a 7-year-old's choice? I'd love to know what you think about wisdom that comes from innocence." After Victoria's dramatic exit, complete with threats about social ruin and promises that he'd regret this, Richard found himself alone with Thomas and Sienna in the dining room. The grape juice stain spread between them, like a purple badge of truth. "Sienna," Thomas said, his voice small but determined, "can you stay with us tonight? Not to clean, just to stay?" Sienna looked at Richard, asking permission with her eyes. He nodded, and she smiled, not the polite smile of an employee, but something real and warm and transformative. That night, Richard found them in Thomas's room. Sienna was reading the Gruffalo, with different voices for each character, and Thomas was curled against her side, his dinosaur plushie clutched in one hand and Sienna's hand in the other. Richard stood in the doorway, watching, and for the first time since Elizabeth died, the house felt like a home. When Sienna tried to leave after Thomas fell asleep, Richard stopped her. "Can we talk?" he asked, and they sat in the kitchen, her domain really, with cups of tea she prepared without asking how he took it. She already knew. "I owe you an apology," Richard began, "and a thank you. You've been mothering my son for 2 years, and I've been too arrogant to see it." Sienna's fingers traced the rim of her cup. "I never meant to overstep. It's just, Thomas is easy to love. He's brilliant and funny and kind, and he tries so hard to be brave even when he's hurting." She looked up, her green eyes fierce. "He deserves better than women who see him as an accessory to a lifestyle." "What does he have?" Richard asked. "With you, I mean, what have I been missing?" Sienna smiled softly. "Thursday night movies where we always let him pick, even though we've seen The Land Before Time 47 times. Saturday morning pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Inside jokes about whether T-Rex arms were good for hugging. A secret handshake for brave days and scared days. Someone who knows that he hates the crust on sandwiches but loves the burnt edges of cookies. Someone who stays. Richard's world shifted again. He began to really see Sienna for the first time. Not the uniform, not the role, but the woman. He learned that she had been accepted to Columbia Teachers College but couldn't afford it. that she sent half her salary home to Dublin to help her younger siblings, that she stayed up after Thomas went to bed to study childhood development books because she wanted to help him process his grief properly, that she had turned down 3 better-paying job offers because she couldn't bear to leave Thomas. "I've been interviewing for the wrong position," Richard said finally. "I've been looking for a wife for me and a mother for Thomas, like they were separate things. But Thomas already knows who his mother is. The question is whether I'm smart enough to listen to him." Sienna's breath caught. "Mr. Chun, You're just the woman who's brought my son back to life," Richard interrupted. "You're just the person who's made this house feel less empty. You're just the only one who seems to see Thomas, really see him, for who he is, not who he could be molded into." "I do see him," Sienna whispered. "And I see you too. You're not the cold businessman everyone thinks you are. You're a man who lost his wife and doesn't know how to stop running from the pain. You're a father who loves his son so much it scares you. You're someone who builds empires because you don't know how to build sandcastles anymore." Richard felt exposed, like she had X-ray vision into his soul. "Elizabeth used to say things like that," he said roughly, "see through all my armor." "I'm not trying to replace her," Sienna said quickly. "I would never—" "No," Richard agreed. "But maybe you're not supposed to replace her. Maybe you're supposed to be you. Maybe that's what Thomas has been trying to tell me. He doesn't want a replacement mother. He wants Sienna." The next morning brought a new crisis. Richard's mother, Catherine Chun, arrived from San Francisco, having heard through the society grapevine about the Victoria Pemberton incident. Catherine was 71 years old, sharp as a blade, and had built the Chin Empire alongside Richard's late father. She was not a woman who accepted no as an answer. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded, not even removing her coat before launching into her attack. "Victoria Pemberton called me." "The help, Richard? You're considering the help?" Thomas, eating breakfast in the kitchen with Sienna, heard every word. Richard saw his son's shoulders tense, saw Sienna place a gentle hand on his back. "Her name is Sienna, Mother, and I'm not considering anything. I'm trying to understand what my son needs. What he needs is a proper mother from a proper family, not some Irish gold digger who's manipulated a grieving child into—" "She's not a gold digger." Thomas's voice rang out as he appeared in the doorway, Sienna trying unsuccessfully to hold him back. "She never asks for anything. She patches her shoes with tape instead of buying new ones. She saves the leftover food to eat for her own dinner, so nothing gets wasted. She loves me for free." Catherine Chun, who had faced down boardrooms and hostile takeovers, was momentarily speechless in the face of a 7-year-old's fury. "Thomas," she said, recovering her composure, "you're too young to understand. There are certain expectations, certain standards, like the standard where someone reads to me every night." Thomas interrupted. "Or the standard where someone comes to my school, plays even though it's their day off. Or the standard where someone teaches me that crying is okay when you miss your mom." Sienna had appeared behind Thomas. Her face flushed. "Thomas, don't know." Thomas turned to her, tears streaming down his face. "You always take care of everyone else. Who takes care of you? Who loves you back?" The room went silent. Richard watched Sienna's face crumble, watched her try to maintain professional composure, while a 7-year-old fought for a right to be seen as more than her job title. "I do," Richard heard himself say. Everyone turned to look at him. "I mean, we do. Thomas and I. We love you back, Sienna." Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Richard, think about what you're saying. The media, the board, our social circle, will have to adjust," Richard finished. "Mother, you taught me that the most important business decision you ever made was marrying Dad, even though your family said a farmer's son wasn't good enough for you. You said love was worth more than bloodlines. Were you wrong?" Catherine's face went through several expressions before settling on something Richard had rarely seen: vulnerability. "That was different," she said weakly. "How?" Richard challenged. "Because you were the one in love? Because it was your choice? Mother, your grandson, you're smart, brave, incredible grandson, is telling us he's found someone who makes him feel safe and loved and whole again. Are we really going to tell him he's wrong because she cleans our house instead of sitting on charity boards? Catherine looked at Thomas, then at Sienna, who was crying silently, one hand over her mouth. She looked back at her grandson, who stood like a tiny warrior, ready to take on the world for the woman he'd chosen as his mother. "You really love her," Catherine said to Thomas, her voice softer than Richard had heard it in years. "More than dinosaurs," Thomas said solemnly, which, in 7-year-old currency, was everything. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked everyone. She walked over to Sienna and extended her hand. "I believe I owe you an apology, my dear, and perhaps a proper introduction. I'm Catherine Chun, and it seems you've been taking excellent care of my family." Sienna shook her hand, too stunned to speak. "Grandma," Thomas said hopefully, "does this mean Sienna can stay?" Catherine looked at her grandson, then at her son, and finally at the young woman with red hair and green eyes who had somehow become the heart of their home. "I think," she said slowly, "that Sienna's already stayed. The question is whether we're brave enough to ask her to stay forever." The conflict reached its peak that evening. Sienna asked to speak with Richard privately after Thomas had gone to bed. They stood on the penthouse terrace, the city lights below them like fallen stars. "I need to leave," Sienna said without preamble. "This isn't fair to Thomas. Or to you. I'm confusing everything." "You're not confusing anything," Richard argued. "You're clarifying it. For the first time in 3 years, things make sense." "I'm your housekeeper," Sienna said desperately. "I clean your toilets, Richard. I'm not the kind of woman who becomes a Chan. You're the woman who held my son through nightmares I didn't even know he was having," Richard countered. "You're the person who taught him that love doesn't have conditions. You're the one who brought laughter back to a house that had forgotten the sound. Your world will eat me alive," Sienna whispered. "I don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners. I can't discuss stock portfolios. I buy my clothes at Target. Then we'll eat at regular dinners. I'll discuss stock portfolios with my CFO, not my family. And Thomas loves Target. Something about the dinosaur section." Sienna laughed through her tears, then grew serious again. "I can't be Elizabeth." "I'm not asking you to be," Richard said, stepping closer. "I'm asking you to be Sienna, the woman who makes terrible jokes while doing dishes, who dances with a mop when she thinks no one's watching, who teaches my son that kindness matters more than perfection, who makes me want to come home instead of staying at the office." "Richard," Sienna's voice broke. "I know it's complicated. I know it's not the fairy tale. I'm not Prince Charming. I'm a widowed workaholic who forgot how to be a father until you showed me. But I'm also a man who's falling in love with a woman who saved his son. And maybe," his voice dropped to a whisper, "saved him too." Before Sienna could respond, a small voice interrupted them. "Are you guys going to kiss now?" They turned to find Thomas in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching his favorite plushie, looking hopeful. "Thomas," Sienna exclaimed, "you should be in bed." "I had a nightmare," he said, which they both knew was a lie, about Sienna leaving. "But if Dad kisses her, she has to stay. That's how it works in movies." Richard looked at Sienna, whose face was a beautiful mix of embarrassment, hope, and love. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "Should we follow movie rules?" "I think," Sienna said, kneeling down at Thomas's level first, "that real life is more complicated than movies. But it can be better too. Thomas, if I stayed, not as your housekeeper, but as my mom," Thomas applied hopefully. Sienna's eyes filled with tears. "Would that be okay with you?" Thomas launched himself into her arms. "I already picked you," he mumbled into her shoulder. "I picked you a long time ago." Richard knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both. "So, what do you say, Sienna O'Brien? Will you let us pick you too?" She looked between them, the billionaire in his custom suit and the little boy in dinosaur pajamas, both looking at her like she was the answer to every question they'd never known to ask. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." And then, because Thomas was right about movie rules sometimes, Richard kissed her, It tasted like grape juice and tears and new beginnings. The transformation that followed was beautiful to witness. Not the dramatic overhaul that Victoria would have orchestrated, but something gentler, more organic. Sienna officially adopted Thomas 6 months later, on a Thursday, their movie night, at the courthouse, with Thomas insisting everyone wear something with dinosaurs on it. Even Catherine Chin showed up with a tiny dinosaur brooch on her Chanel suit. Richard learned to leave the office by 6 p.m. Sienna taught him that bedtime stories were better than quarterly reports, that building blanket forts was a legitimate form of architecture, and that showing up for a 7-year-old's terrible violin recital, Victoria had been right about one thing. Thomas had no musical talent, meant more than any business deal. They moved things around in the penthouse. The sterile white furniture gave way to comfortable couches that could survive grape juice incidents. Sienna's herb garden expanded to take over half the terrace. Thomas's dinosaur collection got its own display room, which he proudly showed to every visitor. The formal dining room where those awful dinners had taken place became a homework and art project station. With one purple stain on the table, they never quite got out. A reminder, Sienna said, of the night everything changed. Richard and Sienna married a year later, in a small ceremony in Central Park. Thomas was the ring bearer and insisted on adding his own vows, promising to share his mom with his dad, but not too much. Sienna wore a simple dress with pockets, Thomas's requirement, for carrying dinosaur snacks, and wildflowers in her red hair. Richard cried when she walked down the aisle, and no one mentioned it. The biggest change came when Sienna finally enrolled at Columbia Teachers College, with Richard insisting on paying for it as retroactive salary for 2 years of mothering. She graduated with honors, all while pregnant with twins. The day she walked across that stage, 7 months pregnant, with Thomas cheering louder than anyone and Richard recording every second, she thought about the woman who had arrived from Dublin with nothing but hope. Dreams, it turned out, could come true. They just looked different than you expected. The twins arrived on a snowy December morning. 2 girls with their mother's red hair and their father's determination. Thomas, now 10, took his role as big brother seriously, reading dinosaur books to the babies and teaching them his secret handshake as soon as their hands were big enough. "You gave me a mommy," he told them solemnly, "so I'll teach you everything. Like how mom makes the best cookies, and dad's actually really funny when he's not working, and if you have nightmares, they both come running." 5 years after that first grape juice incident, the Chin family hosted a different kind of dinner. The same dining room, the same table, still its faint purple stain, but everything else had changed. Around the table sat not society's elite, but their real family. Sienna's siblings visiting from Dublin, Richard's mother, who now insisted everyone call her Grandma Catherine, Thomas's best friends from school, and the twins in their high chairs, cheerfully throwing spaghetti. Richard stood to make a toast, Thomas beside it with his own glass of grape juice. He developed a fondness for it. 5 years ago, in this room, I thought I was looking for a mother for my son. What I found was so much more. I found a woman who would teach us that love isn't about perfection or pedigree. It's about showing up, staying present, and choosing each other every day. Even when we spill things, when the twins shouted, right before knocking over her juice. Everyone laughed as Sienna calmly cleaned it up, turning it into a game like she always did. "Especially when we spill things," she agreed, her Irish accent still strong, her green eyes still warm. Thomas raised his grape juice high. "To Mom," he said simply, "who loved me before it was her job and kept loving me after it was." "To Sienna," Richard added, his voice thick with emotion, who taught a CEO that the best mergers are matters of the heart. "To family," Catherine said, surprising everyone, which has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. "To dinosaurs," the twins yelled, because they were 3 and that seemed important. Sienna looked around the table at her family, the one she'd never expected, built from broken pieces and held together with grape juice stains and bedtime stories and a love that didn't care about social standings. "To second chances," she said softly, "and to 7-year-old boys who see with their hearts." The toast was messy, with juice spilling and twins giggling and Thomas trying to make his dinosaur toys clink glasses too. It was imperfect and chaotic and absolutely beautiful, just like their family. Later that night, After the guests had gone and the twins were asleep, Richard found Sienna on the terrace, tending to her herb garden in the moonlight. The city sprawled below them, but up here, in their little oasis, the world felt perfectly sized. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him, her red hair catching the light. "Only one," she said, and he tensed until she continued. "I wish I'd taught Thomas to aim better with that grape juice. We could have avoided Victoria's whole visit." He laughed, spinning her around to face him. "That grape juice was the best thing that ever happened to us." "The second best," Sienna corrected, glancing to the window where Thomas was reading to his sisters, using different voices just like she taught him. "The best thing was a little boy who knew that love isn't about what someone can give you. It's about who they are when they think no one's watching." "He gets that from his mother," Richard said. "Which one?" Sienna asked, and they both smiled, knowing that Elizabeth would have loved this, would have loved Sienna, would have loved how their broken family had healed into something new and beautiful. Inside, Thomas finished his story and tucked his sisters in, giving them each the special forehead kiss Sienna had given him every night for 5 years. He was 13 now, too old for tucking in, but he still liked knowing his parents were near. He found them on the terrace and joined their embrace. The four of them standing together under the stars. "Hey, Mom," Thomas said, and Sienna's heart still skipped every time he called her that. "Remember when you were just our housekeeper?" "Barely," Sienna said, ruffling his hair. "Seems like a lifetime ago." "I knew even then," Thomas said confidently. "I knew you were supposed to be my mom. Sometimes kids just know things." "Yes," Richard agreed, holding his family tighter. "Sometimes they do." And in that Manhattan penthouse, where loneliness had once echoed through empty rooms, a family thrived. Not the family Richard had planned, not the one society expected, but the one a 7-year-old boy had chosen with the wisdom of innocence and the courage of love. Because sometimes the best families aren't the ones that look perfect on paper. They're the ones with grape juice stains and dinosaur obsessions, with Irish lullabies and Chinese traditions mixing into something entirely new. They're built from Tuesday night homework help and Saturday morning pancakes, from showing up when it matters and staying when it's hard. They're the families where billionaires learn to build blanket forts, where housekeepers become mothers, where little boys teach grown men that the heart knows things ahead never will. They're messy and loud and imperfect, held together not by blood or money or social expectations, but by the revolutionary idea that love is enough. And in the Chun household, with its herbs growing on the terrace and dinosaurs in every room, with 3 children who knew they were loved exactly as they were, love was more than enough. It was everything.